All right, welcome to part 2 of the grapple hook tutorial. So in the last one, we got it set up so we can press the E key and it will fire out our little grappling hook. So next we can, well, let's go ahead and turn off those debug lines. So let's go to the first person character. So this line trace, let's just set this guy back to none. So now when we run it, we shouldn't see any red lines. We just see the grapple hook go out. All right, so let's see. The next thing we need to do is probably, let me see, hold on. So where do we leave off? So inside of here, we spawn the grapple hook. So the next thing we need to do is spawn the actual cable part of the grapple and connect everything together. So first of all, let's save this guy. So this is our grapple hook. Let's promote this guy to a variable. We'll just call it grapple hook, and we can make this guy private. One thing I forgot to do, usually when I have variables that are blueprint read-only like this, like speed, I like to just put them into a constants category, just so they're kind of separated. So it's, you can get the idea like, oh, okay, this variable is not something that actually changes at runtime. It's just more of a setting. So I like to put these in a constants category. All right, so anyways, let's see, grapple hook. Yeah, so make sure grapple hook is set to private and it's set here. And then what we want to do is we want to bind to it so that way we know when it hits something or when it gets destroyed. So we're actually going to do that first. So we're just going to say bind event on destroyed. Or no, we'll do on hit first. So bind event on actor hit. This is going to get called whenever the grappling hook hits something. And we obviously need to know about that because once it hits something, we want to start pulling the player towards it. So we need to give it an event here. So I'm just going to say create event. And that's going to give us this big node here. But all we really need to do is say, go ahead and create a matching function for us. So we'll hit that. And that will jump us over here inside of this function it created. And then we can F2 to rename this, and we'll just call this on grapple hit. And we can make this guy private. So the idea here is that whenever the grappling hook hits something, this function is going to be called. So we'll come back and fill this one out later. For now, let's go back to the fire grapple function, and we want to bind to one more function. So grab the grappling hook, say get, and then again, we want to say bind to on destroyed. So the reason we're binding to the on destroyed event is so that whenever the grappling hook gets deleted or destroyed, we can properly clean up things and, allow the grappling component to know that it can be fired again because the previous shot has terminated, basically. So drag off this guy, and again, we're just going to say create event. And then we're going to select from the dropdown here, same deal. We want to say, hey, just go ahead and create a matching function for us. And then just like I did before, it creates a new function. Let's rename it to something a little bit better. We'll call it on grapple destroyed. And again, we'll come back and finish writing these functions later. So back in our fire grapple function. So like I was saying before, so we need to create this cable. So let's right click and say spawn actor from class and hook that up. So the actor we want to spawn is our BP grapple cable. Make sure you select cable and not hook. And then we want to take this guy and split him up. So this is the location where the hook is going to start, where the cable is going to start at. So again, we can use our handy little cable start location, pass that in, and then make sure you also provide it with the local offset. So say get local offset. And then we also want to give it a rotation, so that way it's rotated the correct way by default. So to get that, we can just get our fire direction local variable, drag that in, and we can say make rotation from X vector and hook that up. So that just basically creates a rotation from the X vector. And that's the way we want the cable to be facing when it spawns. So we'll go ahead and select that. And then like we did for the grappling hook, let's go ahead and promote the grappling cable to a variable as well. So right click, promote to variable, and we'll just call this the Grapple cable. And then we'll make it private as well, since nobody else needs access to it. And now we basically want to take this cable and attach it. So we want the start of the cable to be attached to the player at the location of the specified offset. And we want the end of the cable to be attached to the grappling hook that's being fired through the air. So to do that, we'll start with the starting side of it, so the side that's attached to the player. So all we need to do here is say attach actor to actor, this guy. And so the parent actor is going to be our parent, which is the player. So we'll say get owner. And then this is really important. Make sure you change these drop downs to get world, because what we're basically saying here is although we are attaching the cable to the player, we don't want to actually change the location of the cable because we've already put the cable in the right spot in the right rotation back over here when we spawned it. So sometimes when you attach an object to another object, you want to move that object to the new attach point, but other times like this you don't. And so we wanted to tell it to say, hey, just go ahead and keep the world location. All we want you to do is attach us. So that's why we're doing that. And then the next thing we want to do is the end. So now we have the start set up correctly. So the end location is going to be done this way. So grabbing the grapple cable, and I spelled cable wrong. Just be 1B. So dragging the cable, and we also want to drag in the hook because we're attaching these two together. And then for the hook, we actually need to say cable, or what is it called? Get cable. Did I not do this right? Oh no, I have these backwards. Sorry. The grappling cable, we want to drag off this and say cable component. And then it should be down here somewhere, all the way at the bottom. So get cable component. So this is the actual cable part of the cable, if that makes sense, because this is just the actor, but this is the actual component. And we can say set attach end to. So we're basically telling it, hey, attach the end of the cable to whatever this actor is. And so this actor is going to be our hook. So this is attaching the end of the cable to the hook. I know it's a little bit confusing, but just the way it is. And then the final thing we want to do is we want to take these two nodes and just copy paste them here, because we also want to set the end location. So set end location. So the reason we need to set this end location, this actually took me a little bit to figure out. Oops. We just want to set it to 0, 0, 0, by the way. So just leave it 0, 0, 0. So the reason we need to do that is because the cable actor by default has an end location of 100. And the way you can tell is if you just open up the BP grapple cable, you can see over here on the right, it has an end location of 100. And the reason it does that is because, look, if you change this, it just makes it bigger. So it's basically like how long it is. And the reason they have it set to 100 by default is probably just so it shows up, because if you set it to 0, then it kind of looks weird, like it doesn't really look like a cable. So I think Epic by default just said, okay, we'll just make it 100, but that kind of messes things up, because if you want the end to actually be attached to something, and this is also set to 100, then it's going to be attached to it, but it's going to have 100 units offset. So you can leave it as 100 here because we're changing it in code, but just kind of wanted to explain why we're doing that, is we're basically just getting rid of this 100 so that there's no weird offset for our endpoint. All right, so let's come back here, and I think we are good now on this. So the last little thing we need to do here, for the cable at least, is change some of the settings inside of our BP grapple cable. So open this guy up again. And let me double check here. So I'll try to get this right. Because I played with a bunch of different settings over here to try to make the cable look correct. I know one of the things I enabled is if you search for enable stiffness, we want to turn that on. So that just makes it a little, well, it makes it stiffer, obviously. I just thinks it looks better because it doesn't like wobble as much. And then I think I also, no, I didn't touch that. That might have been the only thing I touched. Hold on, let me just scroll through real quick. Oh yeah, the other thing I changed is the substep time. So this is like how frequently this thing updates. And if you just set it to 0, it will set it to the minimum value. And it's obviously more expensive because it's doing the calculation more, but there's only one of these things, and since it's like so close to the camera and probably is something that's going to be used all the time, I think it's worth giving it extra iterations so that way it looks smoother. So set that down to like the minimum value, and then I think that's the only thing that I actually changed. Yeah, we'll find out if it doesn't work. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a try. Make sure you compile everything, save everything, and then press play. And so now if we fire it, there we go. So now you can see that this little hook comes out, and it does have some amount of wobble to it, but not a lot, because obviously if you're being pulled by something, there shouldn't really be much slack in it, right? So right now it just stays on endlessly, and you can't actually get rid of it, which is fine. So make sure this works correctly, and also make sure if you fire up in the air, it should just go on forever, but it should at least fire. So make sure those things are happening, and also make sure, like, at any orientation, it's always coming out of the left side of your character. If any of those things are wrong, definitely go back and find your mistake before you continue, because it's just going to make your life worse if you don't, probably. Okay, so let's see. The next thing we probably want to do is make that function for destroying the grappling hook so that we can fire it more than once. So let's see here. Let's go back to our first person character. And then, so we had this function, if you remember, this cancel grapple function. So we can probably just go ahead and write that. Let's see. So inside of here, all we really want to do is destroy the grappling hook. So if we take our grappling hook, drag it in, and let's actually make sure it's valid. So right click, convert to validated get, and then we'll say destroy actor. So the reason we're doing this is because everything, like if the grappling hook gets destroyed, then what we're going to do is we're going to destroy everything else inside of this on grapple destroyed function. So by destroying the grapple, it's going to kind of trigger this function to get called, because remember we have this function bound whenever this thing gets destroyed. And so inside of here is where we're going to do the real cleanup. So open up the on grapple hook destroyed, and then, or it's just on grapple destroyed. We should probably call this actually on grapple hook destroyed, because that's really what it's talking about. It's specifically talking about the grappling hook. So in here is where we're going to do a majority of our stuff. So when the grappling hook gets destroyed, what we want to do is we want to set the grappling hook to nothing to make sure we remove our reference to it. We want to set our state back to ready to fire, so that way we can fire again. And then we want to delete our cable as well. So I'm actually going to add a sequence node here, because we're going to do two things. So if you hold down S and left click, you can create a sequence node. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to check if our grapple cable is valid. So drag this in and say get, and then right click and say convert to validated get. And so if the grappling hook is valid, then we just want to go ahead and destroy this guy as well. So destroy actor, so that way the cable disappears as well. And then we want to set the grapple cable to nothing. That way we can remove our reference to it, since we don't need it. And then the last thing we want to do here, we're actually going to come back and do later once we get the movement side of things working. But we're basically just going to be resetting some of the variables inside of the character movement component, because we need to change some of them for when you start getting pulled by the grapple. And so when the grappling hook gets destroyed, we want to make sure we reset those values. So that's what we're going to be doing down here in a second then. But for now, we're just going to leave it blank because we don't have that part yet. Okay, so we should at least now be able to destroy things or destroy the cable and use it again. So let's try that real quick. So if we press E and then we press E again, oh, okay, so that didn't quite work. So it did destroy the grapple hook, but it did not destroy the cable. So why did it not destroy the cable? All right, so I edited a little bit of the middle part of this video out while I was trying to figure out what was going on. But basically, I think it was just a bug with Unreal. Maybe you guys got the same one I did or not. But all I had to do was come back to the fire grapple function, and then where we're binding to the on destroyed event, I just deleted this and re-added it. So I just said create event, and I re-added on grapple hook destroyed because for some reason this guy wasn't getting called. Maybe because we renamed it, I'm not sure. I think it was just a bug. But now if we play it and we press E and we press E again, the whole thing gets destroyed, and then we can keep doing this as many times as we want. So that's what it should look like if everything is working correctly. Let's see. So now we have this. So now pretty much the only thing we need to do is make it so that the player gets pulled. So for that, we have this on grapple hit event that we need to write. So double click on this guy over here and let's start filling him out. So actually, let me first of all, let's make sure that this guy actually gets called. I'm just going to press F9 to add a breakpoint, and then we will press E. Okay, so this one's getting called. If this one's not getting called for you, then you might have to delete and re-add it like we did for that other one, because I don't know why that was happening, but it seems like this one's good to go. So we can start filling this out. So I'm going to disconnect this right now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set the grappling state to attached to target because it actually hits something. So now it's attached. And then we want to modify the character movement component because we want to make sure that the character can easily get pulled. So we want to like remove his friction on the ground so he can get pulled across the ground. We want to reduce his gravity. And I actually give him a little bit of air control so that way he can kind of move left and right as he's getting pulled in the air. So to do that, we can say get owner, and we want to cast to a character. And then we want to say get character movement component. So get character movement component. And then we're going to set the ground friction. So set ground friction to 0. So this ensures that he doesn't get stuck on the ground. Because if you don't do this and you shoot at something in front of you, your guy's just not going to move because he's going to have so much friction on the ground. So we just want to disable that so that the grappling hook doesn't or isn't interfered with by some sort of friction. And then we also want to set the gravity scale. And the reason we're doing this is so that it kind of simulates as if the grappling hook is really, really pulling you and it's overwhelming the gravity. So we want to set that to 0. And then I also, you don't have to do this, but I also set air control. So what air control is, it's a value from 0 to 1, and it represents how much control you have when you're in the air. So a value of 0 means if you press WASD when you're in the air, it won't do anything. And a value of 1 is essentially as if you were on the ground. So you can move in the air as easily as you could as if you were on the ground. So normally it's like 0.05, so I'm going to set it to 0.2 just so you have a little bit of control. You definitely don't want to put it too high, otherwise it's going to allow you to override what the grapple is trying to do for you. But bumping it up a little bit gives you a little bit of control, because you'll notice here in my other project, if I actually like hold down left when I'm going towards this, I can actually kind of steer away from it and then fling past it. So it's kind of cool if you want to do something like that. Definitely don't have to. And then the next thing we want to do here is we want to add velocity, or we want to set our velocity so that way we get that initial direction good to go. Because you'll notice, let me run this again just so you can see what I'm talking about. So if I'm running to the right here and then I shoot my grapple, you can see my velocity immediately changes from the direction I'm running in to the direction of where I'm being pulled. If you don't do that, then you'll kind of get like a rubber banding effect where, like, you know, if you're going fast in one direction and then you shoot the grapple in another direction, your character will kind of slow down and then start going back the other way, and it won't look good at all. So we want to actually set the velocity. So we'll take this guy, say set velocity, and we want to set his velocity to whatever direction the grapple hook is from us. So we're going to make a little macro over here for that because we're going to reuse this. So add or hit the little plus button under macros and call it to grapple hook. And then this is going to return to us a direction. So we'll add a little output pin here and we'll call it the direction. And so to calculate this, we want to subtract the location of the grapple hook from the location of our character, the player, and then normalize it so we can get a direction. So right click, or sorry, drag in grapple hook and say get actor location, and then we want to do a subtract, and then we're going to subtract our owner's location. So we'll say get owner, and also get actor location, and then we're going to hook that up there, and hook that up to the output. Oh, sorry, we forgot to normalize it. So I want to hook that, and oh no, don't open Visual Studio. Nope, sorry. All right, normalize the vector and return. So this is what it should look like. Just the grapple hook's location minus the player's location, normalize it, and that is the direction that we want the character to move in. So now back over here, we can say to grapple hook, and then we want to multiply, and then we want to multiply it by a float. So I'm going to right click and convert to a float. And so this value, I'm going to use 1200, but you can make this a configurable value or choose some other value. This is sort of like the force by which the grapple pulls him. So, or this is the initial force, I should say. So that initial force that you get, because the grapple hook actually pulls you each frame. It pulls you. But we set the velocity initially so that you immediately start going in that direction, as opposed to like a slow build up, because that's not how a grapple hook would work. So that's what this is. Again, you can play with that value if you want once you see what it does. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to save the initial hook direction. And the reason we want to do that is because, let me just play this real quick. So in the event that you actually go past where the grapple hook is, so if I do this and kind of hold left, so I actually went past it, and you'll see it deleted it for me. And so the system basically says, oh, okay, you're past the location of the hook. Let me go ahead and delete it, because otherwise you would kind of go past it, and then you'd kind of like swing back eventually. Like it would, I don't know like how to explain it, kind of like a swinging ship. You'd like to go back and forth. You never actually stop swinging if you went past it. So it kind of has it. So if you go past it, it just deletes it. And so we're going to need this value for later. So let's just make a variable over here and call it initial hook direction. And we're going to say 2D because, and let's actually change this to a vector real quick and make it private. So the reason I called it 2D is because it's the 2D direction. It's not including the Z. And I'm just doing that because I think it makes more sense to not care about the Z in this case. And so let's drag that in and say set. And then the question is, what do we set it to? Well, we know the grappling hook direction, which is this guy, but we want the 2D version of it. So I'm going to make another little macro over here, and I'm just going to call it to grapple hook 2D. And we're just going to take in this guy and convert this direction to a 2D. So to do that, we can right click and say split, and then we can right click again and say make vector. Oh, sorry, not make vector 4. We just want the normal make vector, this guy. And we will care about the X and the Y, but we don't care about the Z, because remember, this is a 2D vector. And now, since we've changed the Z potentially, we need to renormalize it. So we'll say normalize again, and that is our output. All right. Then we'll call this guy direction 2D, like so. So now we can just set that to this guy, like so. All right, so what do we just do here? So when the grappling hook hits something, we set the state to attach to target. We set our friction and our scale to, or our gravity to 0. We bump up our air control a little bit, so that way we can have some movement in the air. And then we set our velocity to the initial velocity based on which direction the hook is from us. And then we just save this guy off because we're going to need this later. All right, so let's give this a try real quick and see what it looks like. So if I press my E, you can see something happens. I sort of get tugged in that direction, but he doesn't maintain that direction for very long. So it should look like something like this. Sort of working, but not really. So that's good. And the reason that's happening is because we haven't actually written the code yet, which continuously pulls you and pulls you and pulls you and pulls you. It only does that one initial pull. Okay, so now that we have this hooked up, we need to write that other code. So let's go back to the event graph. And I guess we don't have anything in here at all yet. Maybe? No, we don't. Okay, so right click, and we want to add event tick, and scroll back in. So event tick, we don't know. This just gets called every tick or every frame. And the reason we're writing it in here is because, well, we need to apply force to the character every frame that he's being pulled. So we only want to do this if he's actually being pulled. So let's drag in our grapple state and say get, and then we can right click and say, or no, sorry, we can drag up this and say switch on grapple state, and that will allow us to check which one of these it currently is. So we only want to do this if we are attached to the target. So if we're attached to the target, the first thing we want to do is add force to our character. So in order to do that, we need a reference to the character movement component. So we're going to say get owner. And again, we're going to cast to character. And then we are going to get character movement component. And we want to use this handy little add force function. So if you've never used this before, it gives you a pretty good idea of what it does if you just hover over it. Just as it adds force to the character, which is accumulated each tick and applied together. So multiple calls to this function will accumulate force like over time, basically. So that's pretty much exactly what we want. So now we just need to specify the force. So this is both a direction and an amount. So the direction is going to be our to grapple hook direction. And then we can just multiply this. So we'll say multiply. And then we want to use a float here. So right click, convert to float. And then whatever you put here is going to be the force, or like the amount. So I think in my other project, I used 100,000. So 100, 1, 2, 3, 100,000. And we'll drag this guy into the force. So that's going to be continuously pulling him. Now, we obviously don't want to continuously pull him forever. We only want to pull him until he either gets close enough to the grappling hook that we can say, okay, he's there, or if he goes past it. Because if he goes past it without actually getting that close to it, we still want to disconnect it, because otherwise he's going to have to like slingshot back to it, and it's going to look really weird and really messed up. So let's add both of those checks. So the first check, like I said, is checking if we have reached the grapple hook. So to do that, we just want to check the distance between ourselves, the player, and the grapple hook. So we'll drag in the grapple hook, and we'll say get actor location. And then we want to look at the distance here. So we'll say distance. And we want to check the distance to the player. So we'll say get owner, get actor location. And we want to check if this is less than some number. So we can say less. And whatever number you put here is kind of up to you. I use 250. But if you want to use a bigger or smaller number, you can. I would just say don't use too small of a number, because otherwise you'll never actually get that close to it. Because if you put something like 2 here, like you're never going to get within 2 units of the actual hook, because of your capsule and all that stuff. So make sure it's big enough where you can actually reach it realistically. So I'm going to use 250, and then we'll add a branch, hook that up. And so if we are close to it, then we just want to go ahead and destroy our grappling hook. So we'll drag in our grappling hook, and we'll say destroy actor. And if you remember from before, whenever the grappling hook gets destroyed, this function gets called, and it destroys everything else and resets everything back to what it needs to be. I feel like, where am I doing? Sorry, let me double check something real quick. That's that. Okay, so we still need to do, okay, sorry, I just forgot where I was for a second. Okay, so back here where we were, we did this step, which is checking, are we close enough to the grappling hook to destroy it? And then the other check is we want to check if we are past it. Like if we somehow flew past it without actually getting close to it, we also want to destroy it. So to check that, we can use this initial hook direction 2D, which is why we made this. And we're going to take this, we're going to take the dot product with the to grapple hook 2D. And so the reason we're doing this is because, well, if you hopefully you already know what the dot product is. If you don't, I'll try to explain it really quickly. Basically, if you take the two dot if you take the dot product of two directional vectors, it's going to return a value between -1 and +1. And so if the two vectors are facing in the exact same direction, it's going to return 1. If they're facing perfectly perpendicular to each other, it's going to return 0. And if they're facing complete opposites of each other, it's going to return -1. So the reason we're using the dot product here of these two values is because if this value returns something that's less than 0, that means that we have moved past the hook, because this is the direction to the hook in 2D space, or the initial direction, like when we first fired it. So it's the direction we were originally moving in, and this is the new direction that it wants to move in. So once we go past it, these are going to be start becoming opposites of each other, and the more they get facing away from each other, the lower the dot product's going to be. And then once it gets below 0, we can safely say, okay, we're actually moving in a different direction than we want to, and we can destroy the grapple hook. So hopefully that makes sense. So we want to say float less than 0 here, and we're going to do a branch and hook that up to the false case. And then just like this, we're just going to say copy paste this guy, because we also want to destroy the actor in that case. All right, so the very last thing we need to do here is we need to reset our values, because remember we changed the character's gravity and its friction. We want to make sure we undo all of that. So if we go to our on grapple hit, we can just take this section here. Actually, take all of this. Take the owner, the character, past, the character movement, and then these three guys. And we're just going to copy these guys. And let's see, we want to do this inside of on grapple hook destroyed right here, where we have this thin. I said we were going to come back and do this later. This is what it's for. So we're going to paste all this stuff here, and then we want to reset these values to what they originally were. So the ground friction is going to be 1. The scale is going to be 1 for the gravity. And then by default, the air control, if you actually look inside of the first person character movement, search for air control. Yeah, so by default, it's 0.05. So we're going to reset it to that. So it goes back to default. And I think that's the only thing we need to do here. Yes, it is. Okay, so now let's give this a try. I think maybe we might be done. So if we press E, we fly towards it, and then you can see it automatically deletes the grapple hook once we get close to it. You should also notice, like, you should have a little bit of control. Like if you hold down left, you can kind of go to the left of it. And if you do something like that, it should still delete the grapple hook. Like it shouldn't ever like try to bring you back if you've flown past it. And so yeah, so feel free to play with these values. There's a whole bunch of different values, obviously, that you can tweak here. If you're not happy with how something feels, like you can adjust the speed or the range, all sorts of good stuff. Oh, did we actually do the range? I don't think we actually did the range. Hold on. No, we never actually wrote the code for the range. So right now you can fire it forever. So let's fix that real quick. I think we actually forgot to do that, yeah. So that would be inside of the grapple hook. Yes. So inside the grapple hook, we need to write some code so it doesn't just fire forever. So let's make a variable on the left here, and we'll call it the max distance, and make it a float. So this will be pretty easy. So what we want to do is we want to save the start location, like where the grapple originally spawned at. And then we want to make sure that if it gets beyond this distance from its original starting location, that we go ahead and we destroy it. So we need to first of all save our starting location. So we'll say get actor location, and we're doing this in the begin play. And we want to promote this to a variable. And we can just go ahead and make this guy private. And we will call this the start location. And then down here in the tick, we just want to check if we have gone past that distance. So to do that, we can very simply say start location, and then we can use this distance function. And we want to know the distance between our start location and our current location. So again, we can just say get actor location. And if that is ever greater than or equal to our max distance, then we can simply destroy ourselves. So we'll do a branch here. And again, remember, this is all working. This is all going to work out nicely because when the grapple hook gets destroyed, that triggers everything else to get destroyed. So all we need to do here is very simply call destroy actor, and our system will handle the rest. And so now we just need to set this max distance. So what I've done is I've just set this to all of these guys. So, all the good stuff that we did before, so that it's exposed on spawn and private and blueprint read only. So that way, when we actually spawn the grappling hook, we can specify what we want it to be. So by default, if you compile and save over here, you should probably set it to something other than 0. So maybe 2500. But you'll now notice if you come back to the grapple components and we go to the fire grapple function and we look where we spawn the grapple hook here, we can refresh this guy. And just like that, now we have a max distance. So you could pass in this max distance to the fire grapple function and then pass it into here, or you could just pass in some other value here. It's really up to you whether or not you want this to be a configurable value. But let's go ahead and test this real quick. So if we fire and it gets more than 2,500 units away, it will just delete. So maybe that's a little short. Maybe we'll do 5,000 or something. It's kind of up to you what you want to set it to. But it is we don't want this thing to just fire forever, right? So yeah, I think now we are probably done. So you can kind of just Spider-Man around. This isn't the best course for a grappling hook because there's not a lot of things to get up on, but you can hopefully get the idea and maybe make your own course and play around with it. And like I said, feel free to tweak values as much as you want, but I think that concludes the tutorial. If you guys liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon if you guys want to support me there. I also recently added a way to support me via crypto, if anybody's into crypto. And then finally, there is a Discord server that I have. If anybody wants to join that, it's in all this information is in the description of this video. So feel free to check it out and join if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.